What if the most tender love story of the 1990s was born from a director's childhood loneliness and almost never starred the actor who made it iconic? I'm not finished. Edward Scissorhands wasn't just a gothic fairy tale about an outsider. It was a deeply personal confession from Tim Burton, a filmmaker so isolated by his own childhood that he channeled his pain into a character who literally couldn't touch the world around him. What you're about to discover are 20 weird facts about Edward Scissorhands that reveal how this modern fairy tale nearly collapsed under its own weight. And stick around for the bonus fact, because there's one detail about the film's ending that even Burton keeps quiet about. Let's cut through the surface and see what lies beneath. Fact number 1. Tim Burton created Edward from childhood trauma. Edward Scissorhands wasn't born in a pitch meeting. It came from Burton's teenage loneliness in Burbank. He sketched a thin, fragile figure with blades for hands during years when he felt unable to connect with anyone. Edward was the visual form of his isolation, an outsider observing suburbia through glass. Burton kept the drawing hidden for over a decade until Caroline Thompson read his treatment and instantly understood it wasn't horror or fantasy. It was autobiography disguised as a fairy tale. Burton later admitted Edward was the character he related to most. The gentle figure with scissors wasn't a monster at all. He was Burton himself. Fact number 2. Johnny Depp wasn't supposed to be Edward. The studio wanted Tom Cruise attached, guaranteed, and bankable. Burton wanted Johnny Depp. To Fox, Depp was still the TV heartthrob from 21 Jump Street. To Burton, he was someone capable of disappearing into emotional oddness. The standoff grew so tense, Burton nearly walked away. Edward needed an actor who could communicate vulnerability without dialogue, someone who could play innocence instead of confidence. When Fox finally agreed, Burton put Depp through weeks of watching silent films to study expression over speech. Edward speaks only 169 words in the entire movie. Depp's performance comes entirely from eyes, posture, and stillness. Burton's gamble became iconic. Fact number 3. The Scissorhands weighed over 20 pounds each. Stan Winston's team built Edward's Scissorhands as lightweight as possible, but even then each hand weighed around 10 pounds. Depp wore them for 12-hour days and couldn't remove them between takes. Safety rules required handlers at his sides constantly. He couldn't feed himself, use the bathroom normally, or adjust anything on his costume. Cast members literally fed him meals. Depp later said the experience felt like forced helplessness, and it shaped every gesture of Edward's performance. The weight restricted his movement, turning each action into effort. By rap day, Depp had developed arm strain injuries, but he welcomed it. The pain, he said, kept him inside Edward's world. Fact number 4. The pastel neighborhood was real and still exists. Location scouts discovered Tinsmith Circle in Lutz, Florida, a pastel suburb that looked exactly like Burton's exaggerated memories of conformity. The production didn't build the neighborhood. They simply amplified it. Homeowners agreed to repaint their real houses in louder colors: bubblegum pink, mint green, pale lemon. For 3 months, residents lived inside a Hollywood set, where streets filled with equipment and driveways became off-limits. Yet most embraced the spectacle because Burton treated their community with care. Many even kept the new paint colors afterward. Today, Tinsmith Circle remains a pilgrimage site for fans. Burton didn't parody suburbia. He found a suburb that had already parodied itself. Fact number 5. Vincent Price was dying during production. Vincent Price accepted the role of Edward's inventor, knowing it would likely be his final film. His health was fading, and Burton, who idolized Price since childhood, scheduled his scenes first to protect his strength. Between takes, medics monitored him as he rested in his trailer. Despite the physical strain, Price delivered a performance filled with warmth and quiet sorrow, a gentle counterpoint to his gothic legacy. He understood the role deeply, a creator loving something delicate and misunderstood. Price passed away 3 years later, making this part his cinematic farewell. It felt like a blessing, an artist from the past welcoming Burton into the lineage of outsider storytellers. Fact number 6. Winona Ryder and Johnny Depp fell in love on set. The chemistry between Kim and Edward wasn't acting. Depp and Ryder began a relationship during production that became one of the decade's most publicized romances. Depp famously tattooed "Winona Forever" on his arm. Their connection was immediate and intense. 2 young actors at the peak of their early fame falling for each other while making a movie about impossible love. Burton didn't discourage the relationship. If anything, he leaned into it, allowing their real emotions to bleed into scenes. The bedroom sequence where Kim tenderly touches Edward's scarred face. That tenderness was genuine. the painful longing in their final goodbye, drawn from the actors' understanding that their own relationship existed in a fishbowl of public scrutiny. When they broke up 3 years later, Depp changed his tattoo to Wino Forever. The relationship's intensity and brevity mirrored Edward and Kim's story, beautiful, doomed, and forever preserved in the film's emotional core. Fact number 7. The ice sculpture scene required massive practical effects. No CGI existed to create the Ice Angel sequence. Winston's team constructed a giant ice block rigged with internal lighting and hidden mechanisms. Depp had to actually carve it using the Scissorhands, while machines inside the ice dispensed shaved ice to simulate snow. The temperature on set had to drop dramatically to prevent the ice from melting under hot film lights. Ryder wore minimal clothing despite near-freezing conditions, dancing in the ice flurries for multiple takes. The entire sequence was choreographed like a ballet, with Depp's carving motions timed to create specific shapes, while the ice machine's output synced to Ryder's movements. It took 3 days to film properly. Between takes, the ice block had to be reshaped and refrozen. Ryder later admitted she got mild frostbite during the shoot. The scene's magic came from practical effects, wizardry, and actors willing to suffer for beauty. Modern audiences assume it's computer-generated. It was brutally real. Fact number 8. Danny Elfman's score was written before filming. Burton and Elfman had developed such symbiotic creative understanding that Elfman composed the entire score based solely on Burton's treatment and sketches. The music existed before the movie. Elfman created themes for Edward's innocence, his longing, and his isolation without seeing a single frame of footage. Burton then edited the film to match Elfman's compositions, reversing the traditional process. The iconic main theme, with its delicate music box melody and soaring strings, became Edward's emotional voice. Since the character barely speaks, Elfman's score does the narrative work. It tells you what Edward feels when his face remains expressionless. The music conveys hope, sadness, wonder, and heartbreak. When Burton finally showed Elfman the completed film, the composer wept. His intuitive understanding of Burton's vision had manifested perfectly. The score wasn't adapted to the film. The film was built around the score. It remains one of Elfman's most beloved compositions, inseparable from Edward's character. Fact number 9. The topiary garden was hand-carved by sculptors. Every hedge dinosaur, every shrub peacock, every botanical creation in Edward's garden was physically constructed by professional topiary artists. Burton refused digital shortcuts. He wanted weight and texture. The production hired sculptors who spent weeks shaping plants and artificial hedges into fantastic shapes. Some were living plants carved into forms. Others were artificial constructs built on wire frames and covered with preserved greenery. The largest sculptures took 6 people to move. Depp didn't pretend to cut hedges. He actually trimmed real and artificial plants during takes, with handlers making sure he didn't damage expensive sculptures. The garden's fantastical quality came from craftspeople applying ancient topiary techniques to create impossible shapes. When wide shots needed more scope, matte painters extended the garden, but foreground elements were always practical. Burton's insistence on physical reality grounded Edward's fantasy. The topiaries weren't special effects. They were sculptures, handmade art created by patient hands with scissors, just like Edward's work. Fact number 10. Alan Arkin improvised most of Bill's dialogue. Go ahead and like and subscribe, because the deeper we go into Edward Scissorhands, the more you'll realize this production was held together by actors making creative choices that saved entire scenes. Arkin, playing Bill Boggs, decided his character should be perpetually confused by Edward, but fundamentally decent. Most of Bill's awkward attempts at bonding, his strange questions, and his uncomfortable small talk came from Arkin improvising ways a suburban dad might process having a blade-handed guest. The "soup's on" delivery became iconic because Arkin committed to Bill's desperate normalcy. He treated Edward like an exchange student rather than a creation, finding humanity in bewilderment. Burton encouraged this approach. He wanted the neighborhood's reactions to Edward to range from fascination to fear, with Bill representing acceptance through incomprehension. Arkin understood that Bill's goodness came from not overthinking. He just accepted Edward because his daughter brought him home. The performance grounded the film's fantasy in recognizable human decency. Fact number 11. Diane Wiest drew from personal experience. Wiest based Peg Boggs on women she'd known growing up. Avon ladies, Mary Kay representatives, suburban mothers trying to brighten lives through cosmetics and cheer. She understood Peg wasn't naive. Peg was kind. There's a difference. When Peg sees Edward alone in the castle, her immediate response is compassion, not fear. Weiss played this moment as a woman recognizing loneliness because she'd felt it herself. The suburbs' pastel perfection was suffocating. Peg's Avon business was escape. Finding Edward gave her purpose beyond selling makeup to neighbors who didn't need it. Weiss improvised Peg's nervous talking in the castle, chattering to cover her own fear while projecting warmth toward Edward. The performance walks a delicate line between motherly protection and gentle sadness. Weiss understood that Peg saves Edward not from cruelty, but from isolation, offering him something she herself craved, genuine connection. Burton later said, Weiss' performance was the film's moral center, the one character whose goodness required no explanation. Fact number 12. Kathy Baker's seduction scene was heavily debated. Joyce's attempted seduction of Edward pushed PG-13 boundaries and generated intense discussions during production and editing. Baker played Joyce as a bored housewife, whose interest in Edward mixes fascination with predatory desire. The scene where she corners Edward in her bedroom, trying to seduce him while he backs away in confusion, was carefully choreographed to imply intent without showing anything explicit. Baker committed to Joyce's desperation and entitlement. She's a woman accustomed to getting what she wants, unable to comprehend rejection. When Edward accidentally cuts her, Joyce's fury comes from wounded pride as much as pain. Baker understood Joyce represented the suburbs' hidden ugliness, selfishness masked as friendliness, desire packaged as hospitality. The scene works because Baker refuses to make Joyce sympathetic. She's casual cruelty in a pink tracksuit. Burton kept the scene because it crystallizes the neighborhood's darkness. These people will consume Edward if given the chance. Fact number 13. The Castle was a matte painting combined with a real location. Edward's Gothic mansion appears throughout the film as a towering structure overlooking the suburbs, but it didn't exist as filmed. The production found a genuine Gothic revival mansion in Dade City, Florida, for ground-level shots and interiors. Everything else was matte paintings and forced perspective. The iconic silhouette against the sky, the castle looming over pastel houses, the tower where Edward lives, painted. Traditional matte artists created glass paintings that were photographed and composited with location footage. For 1990, this was still standard technique. CGI wasn't sophisticated enough for architectural work. The castle's presence was achieved through old Hollywood magic, painted glass, careful framing, and audience suspension of disbelief. Modern viewers assume it's digital. Burton insisted on traditional methods because he wanted the castle to feel like something from a storybook, slightly unreal even within the film's reality. The matte paintings gave it exactly that quality, a fairy tale structure overlooking a nightmare of normalcy. Fact number 14. Anthony Michael Hall based Jim on real bullies. Hall, still shaking his nerd typecasting from The Breakfast Club and 16 Candles, relished playing Edward Scissorhands' antagonist. He researched Jim by remembering kids who'd tormented him in school, jocks who masked insecurity with aggression, boyfriends who treated girlfriends like property. Hall gave Jim a specific physicality, chest-puffing dominance, territorial posturing, a smile that never reached his eyes. Jim isn't evil, he's threatened. Edward represents everything Jim isn't, unique, artistic, genuinely interesting to Kim. Jim's cruelty escalates from jealousy to violence because he can't compete with Edward's difference. Hall played these layers consciously, making Jim's villainy recognizable rather than cartoonish. The robbery scene, where Jim manipulates Edward into breaking and entering, showcases Jim's calculated meanness. He'll destroy Edward to eliminate competition. Hall later said, playing Jim was cathartic revenge against every bully from his past. He made Jim specific enough to be real, cruel enough to be frightening, and pathetic enough to be ultimately powerless against genuine connection. Fact number 15. The snow at the end became a practical effects nightmare. The film's emotional climax, with elderly Kim describing how it still snows because Edward creates ice sculptures in his castle, required massive snow effects throughout the town. Not the gentle flurries from the ice sculpture scene. Heavy, continuous snow, covering streets and houses. Florida locations made this impossible naturally. The production used industrial snow machines, soap-based artificial snow, and thousands of pounds of shaved ice trucked in daily. The snow melted quickly under Florida heat and humidity. Between takes, crews sprayed more. The ground turned to slush. Actors' feet got soaked. The romantic image of snow-covered suburbs came from brutal physical labor and machines running continuously. The final overhead shot of snow falling on the neighborhood took an entire day to film, with snow machines positioned on rooftops and cranes. By evening, the entire production was covered in soap residue and melted ice. The magic of Edward's eternal winter came from very unmagical industrial effects work. Fact number 16. The ending was rewritten during production. Burton's original ending was darker. Edward was supposed to die, sacrificing himself to save Kim from Jim's violence. The studio pushed back hard. Test audiences found the death unnecessarily tragic. Burton resisted initially, then reconsidered. Edward's immortal loneliness felt more painful than death, more appropriate for a fairy tale. The character who can't touch the world continues creating beauty from isolation. Burton rewrote the ending to keep Edward alive in his castle, with elderly Kim's revelation that she never visited him again because she wanted him to remember her young. This change elevated the film from tragic romance to bittersweet meditation on memory and love. Kim's choice to let Edward keep his perfect memory of her, rather than watch her age, became more heartbreaking than his death would have been. Burton later admitted the rewrite improved everything. Edward's endless winter, his eternal creativity born from loss, resonated more deeply than noble sacrifice. The film's lasting impact comes from that willingness to leave Edward alone, but creating. Fact number 17. The makeup. Took 3 hours daily. Depp's transformation into Edward required elaborate makeup application every shooting day. The pale foundation had to be perfect, covering every inch of exposed skin, including his neck, hands, and chest. His hair was styled into the iconic wild shock of black spikes. Scars were applied and blended. The leather costume was fitted and adjusted. The entire process took 3 hours before Depp could even put on the Scissorhands. He arrived on set before dawn for most of the production. The makeup team developed efficient techniques, but the coverage required meant there were no shortcuts. Between takes, Depp couldn't touch his face or lean back without ruining the work. Sweating under. Hot lights meant constant touch-ups. The dedication to maintaining Edward's appearance created continuity across months of filming, but exhausted everyone involved. Depp later joked that he spent more time in the makeup chair than actually filming. The joke contained truth. Edward's distinctive look came from daily commitment to uncomfortable, time-consuming transformation. Fact number 18. The film was released against Home Alone. Fox scheduled Edward Scissorhands for December 1990, positioning it as counter-programming to traditional holiday films. They didn't anticipate Home Alone becoming the year's biggest hit. Suddenly, Burton's dark fairy tale competed against a family comedy juggernaut. The box office contrast was stark. Home Alone made everyone money. Edward Scissorhands made decent returns, but couldn't compete with Macaulay Culkin's mainstream appeal. Critics praised Burton's film, but audiences chose pratfalls over pathos. The studio considered it a disappointment initially. Only later, through home video and cable television, did Edward Scissorhands find its massive audience. The film became a cultural touchstone, referenced and beloved by generations who discovered it after theatrical release. The irony wasn't lost on Burton. His movie about an outsider who doesn't fit in was itself an outsider in its own release season, finding belonging only after leaving theaters. Commercial disappointment became critical, and cultural success. Exactly the kind of transformation Edward himself represented. Fact number 19. Johnny Depp's career changed forever. Before Edward Scissorhands, Depp was a television actor desperate to escape teen heartthrob typecasting. After Edward, he became Hollywood's go-to actor for weird, wonderful outsider characters. The performance announced Depp's artistic ambitions, and Burton's trust unlocked his career trajectory. Depp understood Edward's significance immediately. The role required vulnerability, physicality, and emotional communication without dialogue. He studied silent film actors and mime artists. He worked with movement coaches. He treated Edward like a dance performance, every gesture deliberate and meaningful. When the film released, critics recognized Depp's transformation. He wasn't a TV pretty boy playing dress-up. He was a genuine artist creating a fully realized character. This led to collaborations with directors like Jim Jarmusch, Terry Gilliam, and repeatedly with Burton. Depp's entire career arc, his willingness to disappear into strange characters, his reputation for choosing art over commercial safety, traces directly back to Edward Scissorhands. The scissors didn't just define Edward. They cut Depp free from conventional stardom. Fact number 20. The film's influence reshaped Gothic aesthetics. Edward Scissorhands didn't create Gothic subculture, but it mainstreamed Gothic romance for a generation. Before Edward, mainstream Gothic imagery meant horror. After Edward, it meant beauty in darkness, romance, and outsider status, and fashionable melancholy. The film's visual style influenced fashion, music videos, and an entire aesthetic movement in the 1990s. Pale skin and dark clothing became desirable rather than frightening. The film taught young audiences that different could be beautiful, that monsters might be gentler than normal people, that true love sometimes means letting someone go. This thematic influence extended beyond aesthetics into how stories about outsiders were told. Burton proved you could make weird, personal, visually distinctive films that connected with massive audiences. Edward Scissorhands gave permission to an entire generation of filmmakers to pursue strange visions. Its legacy isn't just in the films it influenced directly, but in the careers it made possible, the artists it inspired to embrace their own peculiarity rather than hide it. Edward Scissorhands endures because it turns profound loneliness into a haunting fairy tale. What looked like a gothic romance was really Burton's most personal film, its production challenges, bold casting, and creative risks all serving a story about being different and longing for connection. Decades later, we still relate to Edward's quiet isolation and unexpected beauty. If this deep dive revealed more than you expected, hit like and subscribe, and share your favorite Edward moment below. After all, we're all unfinished in some way.